We've heard today from Team Korea that we can't put the environment ahead of the lives of people. Ladies and gentlemen, bad environments kill people. And that's what we've recognized down the bench today on Team Canada, and that's Team Korea simply doesn't seem to want to engage with. So what I'm going to do in this speech is analyze this debate in the terms of the three main themes it came down to. They are development, secondly, dependence, and thirdly, delegation. And I'm going to get into each one of those in turn and show you that Team Canada has carried all of these themes. So firstly, let's look at this idea of development. And we'd say that there are many missing links today on South Korea with regards to this point. Now, in general, what they've said is that it cripples economies, and we can't allow this to happen. And we have many things that we take exception to, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, what we'd say is that the examples they gave us of countries where poverty has come about, Zimbabwe and India, are countries that don't prioritize the environment over their development. So their examples don't really link or in any way support what they're trying to prove. But let's actually deal with the principle. What they're saying, ladies and gentlemen, is that a country should have the right to develop, regardless of what effects that has on other countries, other developing countries. What we've said, ladies and gentlemen, in our speeches that they haven't engaged with is that the environment isn't in a vacuum. No country should have the right to pollute, to harm other countries' best interests just for their own self-development. And we're waiting for a response to that from Korea. Also, on another level, what we've proven to you is that sustainable economic growth actually needs to factor in the environment in today's day and age. And we haven't really heard much rebuttal to that from South Korea. Really, what they did, especially the third speech, is limit their rebuttal to an issue of practicality, which I'll get into later. So really, through those three levels, we'll say that we would say that no country really has the right to harm other countries. And also, if they actually do want to help their people, the best way to do that is to factor the environment into their development. Then we have this point on these countries are refusing to sign treaties right now, which simply is circular logic. Just because you refuse to sign a particular treaty on the environment doesn't give you the right to prioritize development, any more than not signing to say the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty gives you the right to nuclear weapons. Now, they bring up this idea that, and in the third speech they really shifted to this, that, well, actually we're not saying that every country should do this. Only the countries with the capability to do so should. Well, firstly, this limits their case, because now they're only talking about countries that can't limit it. What they're saying is wait. What we would say, ladies and gentlemen, is we can't wait much longer. This is a pressing issue. And what I'll take you in a second, sir. And under their bill, we won't have much longer to wait.
Yes. You're agreeing to our case. Our model was very specific on that countries that are capable of environmental preservation should take actions to do so, and then this would that the actions that need to be taken would degree according to
absolutely, I'm agreeing with your case, because that part of your case actually agrees with ours. The idea that countries with the capability to should. So let's actually look at where there was disagreement, which is countries without the capability to. And what we've already proven to you is that there's a large amount of subsidies, especially in Copenhagen, where countries were begging developing nations to take this so they could see concrete action. But what did they say, ladies and gentlemen? A very telling quote. If there are billions of dollars lying around to subsidize green technology, why haven't countries taken it? Simply because they prioritize development over environmental growth. That's why they haven't taken this money, ladies and gentlemen, because they don't want to seem like they're sacrificing economic growth for the environment. And that's the problem we see in today's world, ladies and gentlemen, that we don't see global solutions to global problems. So let's get into this other theme of dependence. And really what we saw, first of all, from side proposition is that by having countries adopt these green technologies, they become dependent on others. And they brought up the examples of Iran and Nigeria, and keeping with apparently their theme today, they're examples that have absolutely nothing to do with their point. For example, Iran was never linked to any sort of environmental policy which forces them to outsource petroleum. And Nigeria was actually a self-defeating example which showed that when you have no environmental regulations in place, problems happen. But moreover, that's not all we're going to say against this. Do you know what fosters dependence, ladies and gentlemen? It's when you outsource problems that affect the developing world and force only the developed world to take care of them. Team Korea today is concerned about outsourcing jobs. We would say they're outsourcing the problems of the developing world to the developed world, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is what fosters dependence. They brought up this idea of hypocrisy, that we've made mistakes in the past, therefore countries now have the right to make mistakes again. We would say, ladies and gentlemen, yes, we made mistakes in the past. But a very good policy in general in life is not to repeat mistakes. And that's what Team Korea seems to want developing countries to do. We reject this. And so really what we've seen in their point on dependence, ladies and gentlemen, is that they've missed the boat. This idea that, firstly, true dependence only comes when you outsource your problems to others, and secondly, just because countries have made mistakes in the past doesn't mean there's an inherent right to make mistakes now. But let's look into where the majority of clash in this debate happened, this idea of delegation. And what we heard from Team Korea is that, well, there's three main issues with delegation. First one is the accessibility of this. The second one is improvements in the actual green technology. And thirdly, this idea of responsibility. And I'm going to get into each one of those terms. Now, firstly, with regards to delegation, they said that, well, these developing nations aren't going to gain access to it, and I've already touched on this. What we've seen in the status quo, ladies and gentlemen, especially in the Copenhagen conference, was that the strategy of developed nations was to offer a lot of money in subsidies to developing nations to change their environmental policies. Unfortunately, and I'll take you in a second, ma'am, what happened is that because developing nations prioritize development over environmental aid, they didn't take these subsidies, and that's something we feel needs to change. Yes?
We've already told you that because developed nations have a disincentive. They're not taking part in these partnerships. Not a dollar has been collected after Copenhagen.
Yes, and that's not because developed nations didn't offer it. It's because no developing nation wanted to take it. That's something they haven't understood. So let's get into the second idea of delegation. And this was this idea of improvements, and really it ended up being a big part of Korea's case. This idea that let them develop now, and later on, they'll take care of the environment. Well, let's look at this. Empirically, ladies and gentlemen, we completely reject this. If there's one thing the modern world has shown us, it's that there's no correlation between large economies and green economies. Let's look at some of the worst polluters in the world today. The United States of America, China. What we would say, ladies and gentlemen, is there's absolutely no guarantee that when you've reached a particular point in your development, that you're going to turn green. That's an assumption Team Korea has made and simply hasn't been able to substantiate. Moreover, what we'd say is when you start developing your infrastructure based on pollutive technology, it's tough to switch infrastructure as well. Also, when you have situations where companies, who are normally the harbingers of green technology, have an incentive to stay in developing nations because it's an easy source for them to pollute, they're not going to have an incentive to bring about change. So really, all these improvements that they say are going to happen aren't going to happen under their belt. And that's why is that problematic? Because Team Korea has stood up today and acknowledged that there's an environmental problem, and their solution has been time. And because we've just proven to you that time actually doesn't solve anything unless there's genuine will in the form of prioritizing the environment, we're not going to see any change. So let's look at this other idea of responsibility. And essentially the crux of this point was that developed nations pollute the most, therefore they have the responsibility to clean everything up. Again, we reject this on a number of levels. Firstly, we'd say it's, in the modern world, it's just not true that developed nations are necessarily the ones that pollute the most. Let's look at the examples of China and India. Developing countries, we would contend, contribute a lot to global emissions. Secondly, what we'd say is that developed nations improve, but then the result is every other developing nation worsening its environment. Where are we going to be, ladies and gentlemen? We're either going to see no change, and the problem that Korea and Canada agree on isn't going to get fixed, or you're actually going to see worsening of the problem as all these countries start polluting and developed nations get better. Simply put, ladies and gentlemen, we've proven to you on this side of the house that global problems need global solutions. And just because developed nations are maybe polluting the most, doesn't mean that you set up a situation in the future where the developing nations of today simply become the developed polluters of tomorrow. That's not something we support on this side of the house. And thirdly, what we've already shown to you is that global warming inherently, and pollution inherently, is a problem that harms everyone. And because of that, ladies and gentlemen, we say there is an imperative for developing nations to take care of their own problems as well. We can help, ladies and gentlemen. The developed world can help, but ultimately the initiative needs to come from the developing world. And that's something Korea hasn't recognized today. Now, the first speaker on side Korea stood up and said, we refuse to pay so much for so little. Ladies and gentlemen, on this side of the house, we are asking a little from everyone for much gain. And on those grounds, we like to oppose.